So we actually did have technical difficulties for once, instead of just saying we probably would before we went live.
Yep.
So here we are. We're live. Mike, we're live. I don't know if it tells you that.
It says it in the top corner.
Good. So, hello, people. I'm still trying to set stuff up. Until 30 seconds ago, I couldn't hear anything.
Just listen to the beautiful synth while we finish up these technical things. Oh, shoot, I'm not logged in, so I can't change anything about the display. Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah. So we're living, at least on my side, in a crucible of history, because OBS decided to update stuff and my interface decided to update stuff, and that means nothing has worked for me for the past week. So the technical difficulties on my end have been pretty rife. So hi, Rob and Robin and Make More Music.
Hey, everybody. You can hear me, right, Christopher?
I can.
All right,
yeah.
Perfect. All right.
So we often begin these live streams by pretending that we have technical problems, because live streams never start on time because of technical problems. But Mike and I are usually pretty good about getting on beforehand and making sure we can at least hear each other, and there isn't some horrible feedback loop or something like that.
Yeah.
But this time it was not staged. Yeah.
No. I was having too much fun playing around with some of the Arturia synths.
I
was like, oh shoot, it's 7:25. I should probably hop on.
And I had logged on and just couldn't get anything to work for a long time. So I had originally planned on having a more efficient setup where everything ran through OBS, but most of the time when I try that, it's it's really good in theory, and then none of the programs that I'm working with are how do I get the big problem here was getting the sound and audio to agree to come from the same place. So they did not do that.
It happens.
So we also didn't talk much about structure for this one. So I didn't know where do you think we should start, Mike and or audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we sort of figured this one would be a little more open-ended and a little more vague. So we chose a pretty large topic, and then each of us sort of said, okay, we'll cover this thing, but everything else is sort of fair game around sort of using ZOIA as a synth. And it's going to be a little different from the boot camps. I think the last time we did a stream was way before
half a year ago.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah.
So
that was a big reason I wanted to do this. Is just we Mike and I have gotten out of the habit. So, it may just evolve into Mike and I, who haven't spoken over video voice in that amount of time really either. Yeah. Just catching up because we're buds. That's what you came for, right?
Absolutely.
That's the selling point. But we do have some stuff to discuss. I'll start us off because I had this little, maybe we'll go back and forth on some stuff, but I know Mike wanted to talk about this topic too. And I want to talk about this topic because it's my absolute favorite topic to talk about when it comes to synthesizer voice design, which is the importance of envelopes. So I had this patch that it's just like a work in progress generative thing that I've done called, I titled it. It wasn't titled until like 15 minutes ago, but it's called Example Envelope, which is a good name for it. And I chose it.
Sorry to interrupt. Please let us know if levels are good for the audio and our mics. People, it sounds good to me, but just anyone.
I turned the volume up a little bit because it sounded a little bit low on my end, but that doesn't necessarily reflect what happens for everyone else.
Yeah.
So I chose this one because I had been working on it this morning. And when I started working on it this morning, what it sounded like was, let me see if I can find the right spot. Be good if I, where is, okay, so when I started on it this morning, this second higher voice wasn't this sort of, like woof, woof, woof thing. It was pluckier. It sounded like this. I don't know if that's loud.
I think maybe just a hair lower on the synth.
Got it.
Yeah, that's good.
So there's two voices in this patch. One is sort of like the idea was to create a little chord, and then another voice that pulls out notes from that chord and arpeggiates them. And when I first had it, it was doing this plucky sort of thing, which is just a decay envelope. And I'll say for the purposes of like generative patches, I often ignore the whole sustain release part of the equation.
You're cutting out a little bit on your mic.
Let me mute that for a second. So when I started that patch this morning, it was just a decay envelope. You know, the sound would go up and then drop off. It runs through a multiplier, which I've talked about many times before, but it bears repeating. If we run, Mike's going to give Mike an aneurysm trying to.
It's fine.
Can we get a close up on the ZOIA cam?
Of course.
Yeah, thank you. And then we'll still not be able to see the output. Let me shade this some, but the envelope is going to be exponentially decreasing. It'll have a curve to it rather than be a straight line. And so when I started out, it had this sort of plucky sound. And that was fine. A lot of my synths sort of try to leverage pluckiness against sort of a smoother thing. But then I was just like, what happens if I do this? And at least for me, that opened up let's see if we can hear it. Can we go back to the everyone is around? Yeah, Mike's way better at this than I am. But like for me, that transformation, which is only just adding like 275 milliseconds at the beginning of the envelope, like totally transforms the sound of the patch. It's the most radical thing I could do to that patch. I can change the oscillator type. I can change, like the FM amount. There's probably some FM amount used in this. I can like mess around with that stuff and it'll have an effect. But the most like quick and dirty way to change the sound and feel of a synth voice is by adjusting particularly the attack and decay parameters. If I just real quick, and then I'll turn it, because I know Mike has stuff to say about this. I'll show like one other way I can do that, which is if I get rid of the decay parameter, what I get out of it is this sort of like backwards, or what to us sort of sounds like backwards audio, because it has an attack that just cuts off. And that's it. Like that like envelope play is just like the fastest way I can think of when I've said this before, Mike's heard it a bunch of times. Like, I think oscillators and filters and effects and all those things get like way more credit than they deserve, because the envelope, and just spending some time like tweaking the envelope, or having an envelope that sort of dynamically changes, if we're in the realm of like a generative patch where, those different, like it could shift from that backwards audio where it's all attack to something that's all decay, and you can use LFOs to move between these places, can do more to sort of like radically transform the feel of a patch than anything else I can think of. So
yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think one of the really cool ways that you can easily switch up like a bassy pluck to like a longer sort of like evolving, I don't know, brass or whatever, is just by changing the contour of the envelope. And really one of the things that I like doing is making like a macro control. So like I'll set like the minimum to be like, a short pluck that I usually apply some delay to. And then on the opposite, the opposite end of that macro control is like a totally like padded out fading sound. And it's the same oscillator, it's the same, bass like filter setup. It's the same exact signal path. The only thing that changes is the envelope. And that's such a drastic change that it's hard to believe that it's like everything else is the same.
Yeah.
Because once you like allow more sound to come through the VCA, then you're allowing more FM to happen, more effects to occur onto the signal. It just evolves much more than just having a very tight window.
Yeah, you're really shifting. What the envelope does is really just sort of it shifts the pardon me, I have a tickle. It shifts the energy, right? It changes where the and I mean this literally. This isn't some the energy of the, like, literally the audio energy, the audible energy, the energy produced by whatever you're listening to it through. It shifts that around temporally, so you have like a decay envelope, and then all the energy is at the beginning and it decays out, or you have an attack envelope and the energy builds, and like you don't just hear that, you sort of feel it too, because it's your ears processing that energy.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's
It's envelopes. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think most of our I think that's going to be the sort of the core of the discussion. And then everything beyond that is sort of like, how do you change the timbre of the sound?
Yeah.
And there's a number of ways that, you can do that. I'm sure Christopher has some really good techniques for his generative patches on, thinking of like accompanying voices together, different styles of synthesis, like I mentioned, brass or like plucky bass, like people sort of know what that sounds like, but like it's important to like have context between those two. And I think you really a lot of your generative patches for the streams that I do attend, they all have a very like clear accompaniment. Like everything has a specific place. It's not like just like a bunch of just like stuff being thrown against the wall.
I did have one other patch I was gonna. So like one of the important things for me with a generative patch and the way that I demonstrate them is like I do these long live streams, and that certainly dictates like how I select voices, because I have to listen to something for a while in that context. And so I generally, like, one of the things I don't do is like a lot of particularly abrasive tones, even though there is a time and a place for those. But I wanted to there's for everything there is a season. So this is another work in I'm going to turn it down. It's probably pretty loud. This is another generative patch that I've been working on for a while. But like, that patch, there's like a main voice, let's say, as I think of it at least, which covers like these 3 pages. And in those 3 pages, like it's like an oscillator that's FM'd and has its duty cycle changed and goes through a ring modulator and I think a bit modulator. I can't even remember all the things that it does. And each time it makes a sound, not only does the pitch change, but also all of those other parameters do. They're all randomized. And like there's a synthesis that occurs like when all of those things happen at once that is different from just like any single one of them happening, like changing on a given step. Like it has let me see if I can isolate that voice. It's been a minute since I've worked on this patch, so
which one is it? Do you have the name?
The patch?
Yeah.
I haven't published this one yet.
Okay.
This is a work in progress.
Got it.
Yeah, let's get rid of you and get rid of you.
A sneak preview, if you will.
Yeah, this one may not get like a 3-hour live stream.
It's kind of like a frog bass kind of thing.
Yeah, but it like has that I don't know how to describe the feel of it, but it has like this sort of gurgling feel, right? And so, like that's an entirely different approach to generative. Like that, it's like harder to just sit down and listen to. Let me. Like listen to that for me for like an hour, which is why like I've had this patch for a while. It uses this is the one of the patches I developed when I was working on the Relabi Wave stuff that I published like a couple months ago. The sort of like beat of that patch comes from the Relabi Wave, and then there's a secondary voice where everything mutates around, and there's a cohesion that comes out of that too. I sort of lost my train of thought on this one. I'm sorry.
No, that's totally fine. No, I was just curious because normally, like when I'm listening to one of your generative live streams, like there'll be sort of a main sort of melody, a main voice kind of, and then there'll be like either offshoots coming from different effects, or there'll be specifically like a secondary voice or a tertiary voice, and they all sort of like occupy different spaces. It kind of feels like they're specifically not like stepping on each other's toes.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you like two ways that I deal with that. Like there's a bunch, right? Or three ways. We've already talked about one is like different envelopes. So that first patch that I started with, part of the reason that I had a plucky envelope to begin with was to make it more distinct from the like underlying pad chord voice that I'd already developed. And I think in that case, like I screwed up, like having them both use sort of like attack-based envelopes made for a much more inviting sound. But like envelopes is one, like, because that's a quick way to just, you can use the same base parameters, and I often do, where, like I'll have a self-FMing sine wave. That's probably like the most common thing you'll find in all of my patches as like a foundation for a voice. Mm-hmm. I occasionally branch out, but that patch uses pulse width modulated square waves for the chord synth. But I like the FM sine wave because it can change. It's almost like subtractive synthesis, because you have this very pure tone of the unmodulated, the un-FM'd sine wave. And as you add more FM to it, it develops more harmonic content. It's like applying a filter in reverse. But like I can use different envelopes with that same bass voice and get very different results that occupy different like energetic states in your mind, right? Like that pad sound will sort of like, you'll notice it, but you won't be like, oh, but then like a pluck will come in and you're like, hey,
right,
what's happening here? So that's one. The other two are use of the stereo field. Like if you have a voice on the left and the right, they can feel like they're distinct and in harmony with one another in conversation, even if they're not all that different, because you'll just hear how they play off one another a little bit more, profoundly, right? Because it's like a conversation in a room, oh, what's going on? Oh, hey, interesting,
yeah.
And then the third one is just, like often like I'll separate those voices out by octaves, right? So if I have like three voices, one may operate, from like, like A1 to A2, the other may operate A2 to A3, and a third one may operate A3 to A4. There's no hard and fast rule about that, but like that also is a way to have like, oh, we've got this low voice and then this higher voice, and so that's my like really simple way, like simple steps, and a bunch of variations develop in those things,
right?
But
no, that definitely makes sense. I can definitely see that being an effective way to sort of go at it. I'm curious, because it's something that I wanted to talk about, maybe this is a good transition, was sort of how effects come into play as a sound design.
Are you typing in a banner?
I'm typing a banner, so yeah.
I feel like I just talked for a while. So
no, that's totally fine. Yeah, so like you mentioned, use of the stereo field as a way to sort of like separate voices, but like maybe another technique would be like use of the stereo field literally for maybe, I know we're neither of us are huge fans of the ping pong delay, but it is a very effective tool for sort of like splitting a signal into like two distinct ears or two distinct paths, and other effects similarly, like a reverb to like really spread something out, or like a filter to like sweep over a certain frequencies, or like specifically key in on a set of frequencies that you want to highlight or diminish. And I think for a lot of people, effects are sort of like a secondary. They're like, you sort of define when you're creating a synth, like synth voice on ZOIA, like you go the basic, usually it's the basic subtractive path. Most people are going to follow that because it's ubiquitous. Everyone sort of understands how that works. And if you don't, there's a good boot camp on creating subtractive synths made by the Empress folks on their YouTube channel.
And on FM synths.
And on FM synths, and just a lot of really, really effective tutorials from them about that topic. But like you have your oscillator, you have your filter, you have your VCA, you have your envelope. Like the basic building blocks are all going to be there. And we in ZOIA specifically, we have 4 types of oscillator shapes, and we can do FM and pulse width and different combinations of them. And then you sort of get to that point where you've built a synth that responds to an envelope, and it passes sound through the filter, and it sounds nice, and whatever contour that you want it has. And then you sort of think of effects as after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it could be really powerful to sort of think as effects as just as an important part of the sound design as the oscillators or the filters or the envelope themselves.
I'd say there's like 3 components, right? One is control. And in like a generative patch, that's a bunch of random modules and quantizers and LFOs. And but in a more traditional like keyboard patch, that's, like the MIDI input or whatever, and how that connects to envelopes and that sort of thing, those modifiers. And then there's the synthesis part, which is oscillators and filters and amps. And then there's effect. Like I think those 3 are all part and parcel, and how you use them is gonna like change. Like they're all in some equilibrium with one another.
Yeah.
So, like I think effects are like big. I'll use another example if you don't mind.
Sure.
So I was just messing around with this, and I ported a version of my ZS patch, my like sort of Yamaha CS80 inspired, loosely inspired patch to like I not really like thinking this through. I set up the keyboard to be kind of like a guitar layout. Let me adjust some envelopes and that sort of thing. But in this patch, I use that like ring mod aspect that I've worked on. So the ring mod is actually like a really big part of the voice, but it's technically, I think a lot of people would say, an effect. And, like how you like adjust everything is going to have really different outcomes. I wasn't prepared to talk about this patch. I just sort of thought of it.
No, that's totally, yeah. I was. It's funny because I was messing around with that patch again recently. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out the layout thing. I screwed it up by taking out the ZOIA. Okay, that's better. I was playing around with that patch recently, and for whatever reason, it like I didn't use the version 2s that often because I was so like just the base V1 of your.
Because you hate it. I understand.
I didn't. No. That's not what I'm saying at all.
You threw a brick through my window and it said bad version.
No, I think what happened was the first version was too good, and it was like the perfect sort of like, long attack release sort of like pad, and it just had the right sort of like timbre and all that stuff. And then when I tried out the V2, and it had that, but it wasn't as immediate, I think was the issue. But I did dive into it again recently, and that ring mod really allows you to create a unique texture that couldn't be done on the original version that you had made,
right?
While not sacrificing voices or the effects. It was just like, here's a better version of this patch, Mike. You just need to learn how to use the controls, type of thing.
Yeah, and I mean, like that's a like a part of like ZOIA patching, right? Like with more complexity comes like a loss in ease of use, right? Like so like there are like patches that I particularly for like playable patches, there are patches that I like, that I like because I can just sort of load them up. And the only thing I really need to worry about is probably like how the envelopes are set up.
Right.
I might change that around. So like, that's why like the patches that I play most often of my own design are probably like FM keys and idiotastic.
Yeah.
Because like those are just really like basic, like in a lot of ways. So yeah, like
sometimes I don't even use I like use the smallest amount of FM on FM keys.
mm-hmm.
It just sounds really good.
Yeah.
But it's like it's just a subtle like small.
I mean, then it's just a vibrato essentially, right? Like
yeah.
and vibratos sound good.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were talking about it.
Yeah, no. Sorry, we're a little scattered today. But like specifically, like one of the, I know we're trying to focus on talking about the ZOIA, but I think the real sort of like thing that like caused me to like consider them just as important as the envelopes or the oscillators is patching on the Hydra, because like the core sound of it is really, really good, and there's a lot of things you can do with like the mutants and stuff, but I think the effects are like most people would be like, oh, they're just like whatever, like you can I'd rather use like an H9 or an auto BAM or whatever for like outboard reverb or some other extra effect. But I think like there's distortions in there's like a lo-fi effects, all these things that you can do on ZOIA as well, and when you sort of treat that as part of the signal path, as part of like the timbral sound of the synth, and it really sort of opens things up.
Yeah, I think effects on synthesizers is like a big open question, and I think the thing that people where I disagree with some people about effects on synthesizers is like, I have an Arturia Polybrute, and like the effects on it are stellar. I mean, they're great. They're really, really good. And like one of the big disappointments about the Polybrute is that it doesn't have an audio input. So you can only use those on the voice.
Right.
But like at the same time, in certain ways, they're harder to dial in because they sound so good. Whereas like I like the Hydra synth, I distinctly remember I had one for a while, and I'll talk about the Argon 8. The Argon 8's effects get shit on all the time. Pardon my language, but like people are like, oh, the reverb isn't like big and huge and boomy, and like like there's a certain inobtrusiveness about the effects of the Argon 8, and I'm guessing probably like the Cobalt 8. But from a sound design perspective, that made them much more useful, because then they were tuned really well to act, in my opinion, as sort of like an extension of the synthesis, right? It wasn't like I'm going to take this synth voice and then pass it through like the wowiest reverb ever, and then it just sounds like the wowiest reverb ever with like something going into it, right. The blanket effect that, and so like the Hydra effects, like I've definitely read and I remember, like they're not like the most beautiful effects that you'd want to use like on everything forever, and like all your effects problems are solved. But what they do is complement the sound, and that's again, to swing it back to ZOIA, that's like there's a reason why I favor like the plate reverb, which has a more like smeared out effect than I do like the Hall or something like that if I'm putting together a synth patch, because I think that smeared element generally complements the sounds I'm going for. unless I'm going for something that's a little bit more organic. And then the hall, I think, will suit that more, where it makes everything more distinct almost. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really about sort of like figuring out like what fits best from a sound design and an accompaniment standpoint. Like I can think of like I'm one of the hugest like lovers of the ZOIA's distortions. The fuzzes are okay. The distortions are really, really good.
Yeah.
Like better than you would expect.
Yeah.
The
fuzzes are, with a little bit of filtering, are not bad.
Right. I think they are a tad expensive on the CPU for a stereo patch. I think like one fuzz is like 15% already. So it's a little pricey to do two fuzzes. So that's why I opt for the distortions. But I do agree with filtering, and you would use the filtering on the distortions too. But especially the pushed overdrive is probably my favorite out of the bunch, and it's sort of that like subtle saturation that like a Deco could do, or like I'm trying to think of other pedals that would like probably the new Gen Loss saturation, sort of like hysteresis type of thing that they were going for. And it just has like that right amount of grit where it can sit in a mix and it can sit with any sort of like oscillator throwing at it. So like if you're doing like, a pulse wave square thing and you want to just like subtly like add some grit to it, just, pop on a push overdrive with some, with the right filtering and the right settings, and you're golden.
It also has an EQ, like the part of the reason that the overdrives are expensive is they already have some filtering built into them, right? Like, and that one in particular, like if you're talking about what people think about from a saturated effect, it cuts off a little bit of the high end. I don't know exactly where, but I guess probably around like 4K.
Yeah, 4 or 5. Yeah, something like that.
And it boosts the low mids. So you get this sort of like, if you run a synth through it, you get a fatter sound, right? Like, I mean, if you looked at an EQ curve of like some preset plugin you had that was like fat sound, it would be like a little bit rolled off in the highs and a bump in the low mids, Yeah.
So that's usually my go-to for like ZOIA sound design, or even, when I'm patching on the Hydra, when I'm playing around with, VSTs, I'll like toss on a distortion saturation plugin, and it just like makes it just sound better. Because that's just like what I prefer.
Yeah, I really wish the overdrives were a touch less expensive. I mean, talking about synth design, that's something to take into account when we talk about the stereo field, is like the stereo field begins somewhere, right? Like, and so, like when I do use overdrives, I don't use them in stereo if I'm building a synth patch, because I generally don't have to. What I do is I distort whatever sound I want, and then I open up the stereo field by like taking that distorted sound and like sending it through a panner and do a reverb or
a Haas
delay or whatever, right? Like the like, and that is something to keep in mind. Like a lot of times, just on like a practical level, if I'm building a generative patch and I have some idea and like, all right, yeah, I'm at like 110 CPU. This is not a good idea. Like a lot of times the trick is to like work backward and see, because I do apply a lot of stereo effects and that sort of thing. Like, do I actually need to filter these voices in stereo, or can that part be done in mono, and like I can cut out a filter then because I've been using two, and like I sort of like trace backwards and think like, where is the point where it becomes critical that I operate in stereo? And like depending on the setup, that can be like very early, because like you can, if you're using different voices sort of like, and you want them to like begin the game sort of spread out, because once everything's in mono, you lose control over where everything before it sits in the stereo field.
Right.
And that's like the trade-off, but like there are occasions where I'm like, I don't actually need to do this thing. Oh, wow. There's a storm rolling in. Distracted. Wait. Okay. I think we lost picture for a second. Oh,
it's still up. Well, at least according to this. It says so in StreamYard.
yeah.
You can check on YouTube to be sure. No, I will continue, but that's a good point about not like, I guess, worrying too much about like, or committing too much to the stereo aspect of things. Because as much as we love just like, you know, spreading things out into the stereo field, if we can save some CPU and not have to do that as early, then it's going to be more beneficial. And it looks like we are still live, so that's good.
Yeah.
Don't repeat what I just said.
I just got some weird signals, and there is a storm coming through, and we've had some issues with power.
Some outages. Got it. Well, I will carry on in case that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, and just in a general like ZOIA patching sense, like you know, like a lot of times, like I will tell you that like I build stereo effects patches that will sum the input to mono before they do something that creates a stereo image, and like it depends on the effect, and it depends on where it is in your chain, and it but there's not a real like that's not a bad word. Like a lot of the best reverbs you've ever heard in your entire life sum to mono. Like it's you know, like a really common practice in reverbs. I do it a lot in some of my like crazy looper patches. Like I just updated Johann Looper, and that sums to mono. Because like you're fucking around so much with the signal. Like the whole purpose of an effect like that or a big lush reverb is to make the input and the output sound different. Yeah. You know, like the wet and the dry signal sound different. So like, you know, being a mono purist there in the like every step of the way must be total, like you actually can't create some of those effects because
stereo purist.
Like you're mixing signals together like purposefully to you know, like make them not match up with their inputs.
Yeah.
So
no, that's a good point.
This is the part where I feel like we should. Do you have questions, people watching? I don't know what I'm looking.
There was an earlier one that I think would be good. We talked. I think there was like one other topic, but this is a good point to pause that I at least wanted to bring up. So I'll show this question from Angst. I know ZOIA can do a lot of synthing. I'd love to know what you feel it's not great at when it comes to synths.
There are things it can't do. I don't know if that's the same thing as it not being great at those things, right? Like, and so like I can pick apart that side. Like it doesn't have hard sync. I wish it had hard sync. It, you know, like it obviously doesn't do like wavetable oscillators. So like you can like, oh, I can have a sine wave side of an audio balance and a square wave on the other mix. That's like kind of a wavetable and like a really like lawyery sense of things.
Yeah.
But not what we're talking about when we're talking about wavetables. So there's like that end of things. I think there are things I wish it did better. Maybe that's the way to like you know, because of the beginning of like the envelope, the ADSR could have some features that I'd really like, that like you can get around and like use some modules to get different curves for the envelope. But like, I really wish I could on the module itself and like very easily adjust the attack curve from logarithmic to linear to exponential and like, and be able to modulate that. That'd be awesome too. So like the envelopes are really functional and I use them a lot in like the place that I began was look how effective they are, but they could be more effective.
Yeah.
What are,
sorry.
no, I was gonna. What do you think?
Oh yeah, I'd agree with those. I think this is more about the limitations than what it isn't necessarily good. I guess that by definition it would not be good at. It's not super good at huge polyphony, obviously, because it costs a lot to create these sort of like similar chains of things. And I think you can probably do, like, if you stretch it, you could do 10, but it'd be a very, very simple patch beyond just like the oscillator stack.
Do you remember this before 2.0? I haven't thought about like updating this patch, and I'm not going to update this patch. I did one of those keyboard poly ones, and I think I got it up to 13 voices or 11. It was an odd number of voices with a reverb light, but it was just like oscillator into VCA with an like that's all it was, which is a synth voice. But yet, like, there's a trade-off between complexity and polyphony, right? That's sort of unavoidable.
That's when you break out the either the second ZOIA or the Empress Reverb for your, post effects.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that's the other thing is like, I realize the like appeal of like doing it all in box, but sometimes like I've made synth patches where I'm like, I threw a reverb light on this because people like it when like there's a reverb on a synth patch, but like really this patch sounds much better if you put it through like a higher quality reverb.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, yeah, that's a convenience, I guess, but like most people I feel like who have a ZOIA probably have some other source of getting.
Nope. I think we lost him, or at least a little bit. Looks like we're still live though. All right, this will be fun. All right. So what I think Christopher was going to continue saying is people who have a ZOIA probably have some way of getting external effects or other processing beyond, their 13 or 11 voice synth that they build, the simplest of synths on ZOIA. So I definitely think that's one of the things it's not super great at, but you could definitely create patches that have, 6 or 8 or even 4 voices that sound really, really good, as evidenced by what Christopher has made in his patches. Yeah, I think his power went out. So I'm gonna stall for a little bit and see if it comes back. If not, then I'll take some more questions. And I did want to talk about one other thing related to sort of like ZOIA as synthing, and sort of I guess I'll transition now. The one area that Christopher talked about that we haven't really discussed is the sort of the controller aspect. Like we talked about creating voices from the oscillators and FM and other techniques, using effects within the signal chain, using different envelopes, and then sort of the last stage is how do you get the notes in, and how do you do like expressivity from your controller or from the device itself. And the one thing that I'll sort of highlight the most that I love is Aftertouch. So Aftertouch is a pretty common technique on keyboards. On ZOIA, it's the MIDI pressure module, and it accepts channel pressure, not poly. I hope it gets poly soon, but for now I'll accept the channel pressure. And the way that it works is when you press the synth key, or when you, I guess in the context of ZOIA, because some pad controllers will have Aftertouch as well, and you hold it and you sort of like press your finger down with like pressure, it's going to change some parameter inside the synth, and most of them map it to like the filter cutoff, or some will map it to sometimes the envelope I've seen pretty commonly, or to like an effect mix, especially for channel pressure, because it's channel pressure is going to reflect all of the keys rather than individual ones. So that makes sense for like a source for like a reverb send or a delay mix or some of the control that you want to adjust with your sort of playing. So that's definitely probably my favorite controller. There's also Velocity, so the MIDI in module. Hey, Christopher.
Hi. I lost power.
I figured. I kept on going. I started talking about controllers.
Oh, good. Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
No, absolutely no, totally fine. I wasn't sure how long you would be dark, so I just went ahead and with the next sort of topic. So I just talked about aftertouch and how I wish that the ZOIA would implement a poly aftertouch, but I'll take the channel aftertouch for now, and how it's a good destination for filters or effects mixes or even envelopes. If you want to sort of like change the envelope over time while you're pressing a key, that's a cool way to adjust things. The next one is going to talk about velocity, which is sort of a weird concept, at least to me. I'm not a keyboard player. I'm more of a guitarist. So like when I think of velocity on a guitar, it's sort of like the strum intensity, I guess. So like that just sort of defines like how loud or soft your sound is going to be. But on a keyboard, it's, different like pressing intensities. And that's found in the MIDI notes in module that you have to, I think it's an option you need to enable. And then you hook it up to whatever destination. Again, filter cutoff is a big one for that. You can key track a filter with velocity. You can key track a filter with the notes themselves, and then you can add velocity, add just like a subtle sort of like bump based on how hard you're playing, or you can do it to an effect or FM level. All really good.
The amp's the most common one,
right?
Yeah, where you control how loud
it
soft.
is, right? And that's super common for like pianos. Like the FM piano has like a really good response to velocity, despite me being terrible at sort of like gauging how hard I'm pressing on the synth on the keyboard. Now, if I remember correctly, I don't use it that much, but if I remember correctly, the keyboard module also has velocity output, or it's not something you can
on the
actual.
No.
Is it like a fixed amount or no?
No, there's a trigger output.
Trigger, that's what it is.
That's probably what you're thinking of.
Thank you.
No, so one way to like mock velocity in a generative patch or something like that, where you don't have access, is to like tie whatever's controlling your amp, right? Like to a randomized value that can either be like wide ranging or narrowly ranging using a multiplier, right? So you multiply whatever you were already sending to your amp against some random value so that some notes are harder and some are softer. Or you can use an LFO in that case too, right? Where some notes will be louder and some will be quieter, and that may escalate in a, like crescendo. Right. But yeah, I'm going to work on some technical stuff real quick.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think of other controllers. I feel, and Christopher can correct me if I'm wrong, or other people if they have opinions or comments about this. I feel like most people, when they're interfacing with the ZOIA as a synth, they're going to be using an external keyboard. Like it has a keyboard module and it works. Christopher has made some like sort of like polyphonic ways to play the keyboard using the grid, but most of the time people are going to be using a keyboard controller to get MIDI notes in and to get different like a mod wheel or a pitch bend or aftertouch or whatever for these additional controls, and you map them to certain destinations. And he's getting out a KeySet Pro to give an example. And some of them even have CV, like that one does, and most are just MIDI. But I think that if you're someone who really likes playing on a keyboard and is better than I am, you'll probably have better sort of techniques. But for the most part, I sort of fall on like the ones that I see on the panel, like keys themselves and mod wheel are like the big ones that I always use in patches. And I usually set the mod wheel to be like my macro, and then I'll have like key tracking on the filter and then some aftertouch to like affect either FM or maybe an effects level or mix.
And pitch bend, that's another.
And pitch bend. Which pitch bend is a tricky one for me because like my first instinct is to like do a full octave bend, which is cool.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. But at the same time, I kind of want it to have like, I want to use it as a vibrato. So it'll be like +1 or 2 or whatever, whatever the ratio is for that subtle change. Yeah.
I like the really good people at keyboards, and I'm not one of them. Like they'll just use it like you would use vibrato on a guitar string, right? Like where, you know, you play and then you add just a little pitch bend, like, you know, and it sounds wonderful. And I try to do that, and I can't do that. Like I can do it for like a second, and then I think too much about it, and this hand forgets what it's playing, and the one they don't talk. These two hands don't talk to each other as well as I wish.
It doesn't make sense to me because I can do that on guitar. Why can't I put it down on a keyboard?
The Osmos. So this is where we get into the part where I just talk about the future. But like so like if you're a guitarist and you have a MIDI keyboard, or, you know, there's a chance that you have done this. You have played a note and then you've wiggled your finger.
Yep.
Right? You've gone like, this is how I'll get there. Because that's a very natural sensation if you come from that sort of like playing discipline. And the like Osmos and the MPE controllers of the future and today are like trying to make it so when you do that, it actually does something.
Right.
So that you don't feel quite as dumb when you like look down and you're like, oh yeah, that's the ticket, Charlie.
Oh man.
So hopefully we're entering I mean, I'm it's hard for me to get like too like on excited about like the future of MPE, because it's still like a niche within a niche, and like for a lot of people, like, you know, the KeyStep Pro is fine. It does, you know, what you need again. But yeah, there are some options out there already, and I think like we're going to see more of them in the future. So, you know, like the one that exists is like the Linstrument, right? Which is, you know, if you hear Roger Lynn talk about it, it's a way of him trying to translate the gestures of guitar into an electronic instrumentation environment. So yeah, like one day.
One day. Or I could just learn I could just get piano lessons, I guess.
Sounds horrible. Don't do that. But where are we? What is happening?
No. I think we're pausing for questions again, unless you have other things to talk about from controller.
I can talk about other things, but I'd rather talk about things that people in the audience want to talk about.
I think there is one. I have a topic too in my mind. If we don't get a question.
Yeah. Sorry, there was more thunder. I'm a little bit apprehensive. I may disappear at any moment. We've had, after like some terrible years, I'll fill some time while we see if we get any questions. This is, you know, the excitement of the
audience participation.
For many years we had like terrible power outages, and I live in West Virginia, and I think like at least some people have some like impression that that's like backward ass place and I like empty my stool in a bucket or whatever. But the reality is that I live in like suburbia, like most people in the world, except for we've had like really bad power utilities because it's a mountainous state and like a bunch of power lines go up and down. They get hit by trees. We have trees. We have a lot of trees in this state. And but like they mostly sorted that out in the past 3 or 4 years. We used to get these power outages like out of nowhere, like on a bright summer day for like 2 days, and we'd have to throw out everything in the fridge and like it be 95 degrees and like just bad. It sucked. It was terrible. But like they mostly resolved that. But in the last week or so, we've had a bunch of weird outages, and it makes me feel pretty like apprehensive when it storms and like anxious about like having to throw out, we used to throw out like hundreds of dollars of food every couple of months, and it was like,
yeah, it gets annoying.
Yeah. So yeah, like I guess we're getting your mystery topic, Mike. That's what we've been prompted with.
I'm trying to think if I can relate it to power outages. Power surge.
The Prestige.
All right, I'll talk about mystery. My mystery topic is probably something, I think you touched on it briefly, but one aspect that it's sort of a controller and an effect, sort of like those two sort of like schools and sort of like creating a synthesis patch or a synthesis, sound, using LFOs for like rhythmic style of effects, or like sort of like creating a complete quote unquote arrangement out of like, I don't know, 3 oscillators and an LFO. So like the classic example would be like you open up a VCA that has a noise, that has a noise module every quarter note, and you have like, some like noise drums, and then you can also use that for the filter, so that way when you're playing the synth, it's in time with that rhythmic aspect, and you can sort of like create this whole like song from like very simple parts. And it may not, be the most technical synth, but it's something you can like easily play along to, and just works really, really well. And I find myself doing that all the time with noise filter and some VCAs, and it's really, really simple to make. So I think that's a cool way to combine like a controller with a couple like, I guess, classical effects that you would associate with like electronic music.
Yeah, I mean that's like an old school method too, right? Like we live in this age of like sequencers that can do fuck all. Right. On the ZOIA Discord, we've been having a conversation about, if Ants, I don't know how to pronounce that screen name, is still here, like he's been talking about that. And Coltranus had a question on our question of the week that like also had to deal with like, sequencers and how to make them interesting. And like we've had a lot of good discussion in the last 24, 48 hours on the Discord about that. But like there is like a bunch of really interesting old school methods, and one of them is like you can do a lot with just like clock dividers, like and tying clock dividers to different, like effects or different, like events or whatever. And like that's a style of music that I kind of wish I knew more about. Like it's very popular in like some of the old school like techno, where they had to kind of invent that because there weren't like, if you look at the like original analog sequencers, they'd be like 5 or 8 steps or whatever, and like you couldn't really do a whole lot with them. So you like the advent of flip-flops and clock dividers and that sort of thing allowed you to like extend that range, because you could like have them respond to rhythmic events and change in ways that like, and if you get really like into it, there are people who are really into it who like can set up like 3 different clock divisions to create this like these rhythms that just like constantly shift around and do really cool stuff. I don't know that magic very well.
Yeah, and I think the reason that it's so effective is because it's very low level. Like it's a concept, like, you know, maybe when you're first starting out, it's a little hard to wrap your mind around clock dividers and flip flops and stuff like that. But they're just sort of timing events, you know, along some you know, tempo scheduling. And when you sort of like, you can apply it anywhere. You can apply it to, like I was saying, like to a filter. You can apply it to your envelope. You can apply it to whatever you want. That's like sort of the beauty of it. And I think that's sort of like old school, like analog computing is really where that started. And it's, I think it's more popular today in some aspects because I maybe confirmation bias, but I have been seeing a ton of like Surge people and Buchla people, like it's like that I didn't expect, and I had no idea about this stuff like years ago, but it's starting to like become more of like a resurgence of that sort of like style.
The future is the past.
Of course.
Yeah, you know. But yeah, it's sort of. I do think like there is, you know, like there's a way to bemoan like the future is the past, right? Like we have this lo-fi retro nostalgia thing, and I think like there are ways in which that's like terrible, and I wholly own the hypocrisy that I've created many lo-fi patches and often espouse that aesthetic in my own work. But like there's a danger there, right? Like man, I wish I could remember how Kundera like talked about nostalgia now. But he has a good sort of critique of nostalgia as being this thing that like anesthetizes, you know. But at the same time, there are a bunch of techniques that like can be rediscovered and reapplied in really novel ways. And so like there's this weird tension, I think, between like exploring the archive and aping it, right? Mm-hmm. You know, where like on the one hand you're like diving in and it's a very sincere gesture to like discover things that may have been forgotten or overlooked, or, you know, like anyone who has like any experience with archiving knows that like the archive is always incomplete, right? And the flip side of that though is that like you can not use those as springboards to build a new future, but rather just sort of like huddle in the experiences of the past. Like you can fetishize it, you know?
Right.
And
it's like having a time capsule, but just for that event, not sort of like going beyond that.
Yeah. And like a time capsule that's just sort of like your old Pokemon cards that just make you feel happy and like don't have any real like, they don't have any path to the future either, right? You know, like
you can sell them.
I'm gonna, yeah, you can sell them and get some clock dividers, but no, like, you know, so this is a little bit more philosophical, I guess, but like I do think that's like a real conversation that like if you look at like a bunch of like another conversation that we have had recently is about like the Gen Loss 2 and the Bygones Pro and like, you know, the you know, the like tape deck plugins. Gain. Pardon?
Degenerate gain.
Yeah, you know, but like I think that's great because like if you look at what Tom did with the Gen Loss 2, like he's not just sitting back and saying like, let's make something that sounds the same. Like, you know, there's a lot of innovation in that product, you know, like and the effort that he put into building the Gen Loss 2 and what Mark did with the Bygones as well. Like those aren't just like, you know, simple devices that are just meant to be like plug in and you're back in golden times and like, you know, that myth of a past.
Right.
But like there's a danger there too. You know, I'm
No.
I'm way off the topic of ZOIA patching at this point.
I think it's spot on because, like you're saying, it bleeds into a lot of your patches that you've made because it's a popular topic that people want to explore and create. So like when they see like the Gen Laws, the CBA Gen Laws 1, when it was going for thousands of dollars, some crazy amount of money. One of the biggest recommendations I made publicly many times is how good the degenerate gain patch is that you made. Yeah. I believe without experiencing the actual Gen Loss yourself.
Yeah, I've never played a Gen Loss at any point.
It's mind-boggling how spot on it is to the V1 of the CBA Gen Loss.
I'll use one of my other tired phrases. The most valuable tool you have for patching are these two babies. Let me tell you. If you listen carefully and you think about what you're hearing, you can dissect stuff. But yeah, and I think, why would you ever pay $2,000 for a Gen Loss? Why would you ever pay $8,000 for a Klon? It's not to say that those things don't have value, but the question is, what are you buying when you pay $2,000 for a Gen Loss? Are you buying the actual effect of that pedal, or are you buying the knowledge that you possess it, right? And I think if you're just looking for that effect, there are other places to find it that don't cost $2,000. I mean, I realize we're past that era now, but there will be another thing, right? There will be the next discontinued pedal, and that'll go up dramatically in prices, and everyone will say, "Oh my gosh, I need a Para EQ," right? Yeah. I'm sure Para EQs right now sell for $400 or something like that. And don't get me wrong, Para EQ is great. But there are other EQ pedals, and if you ascribe magic to shit, you're
gonna have a bad time.
You're free to do what you want, but
right. But you're gonna have a bad time.
Yeah, you're gonna have a bad time.
No, I totally agree, and not trying to be, people can pay whatever they want, free to do what they want. I have no skin in that game, but I just personally don't see the point of chasing that.
Yeah,
but if you have the means to do it, why not? Why not? Trying to think what else we could talk about for ZOIA. Same thing.
I'm dealing with technical stuff still from the power outage.
Ah, okay.
So, but I do have why aren't you? What happened here? Oh, I can talk some more about generative stuff if we need filler, or not filler, but I was going to talk about. I can talk about all sorts of stuff, but I was going to talk about a couple of patches that I've actually made that people can go out and download if they want.
That sounds good.
So let me see. Can we? Do you have access to the ZOIA cam?
Oh yes, I can bring it back in.
Okay.
Should I highlight it?
Maybe. Now I'm getting an echo.
Yeah, there's an echo. Which one should I mute?
No.
It's not letting me use the.
Still
got an echo.
Technical problems.
Oh, you can? Okay. I learned something new today.
What's that?
You can drag on, if you drag my image, you can make me the highlight or you the highlight.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's not making any noise from my interface, so I think that's where the problem is.
Most likely.
Are we still getting an echo? Yes,
yep.
We are. Why is that?
in the meantime, we did get a good question from Brian. Thank you, Brian. What have you guys been excited in the world of synthesis lately, perhaps in general, but also specifically to ZOIA? I'll start with specific to ZOIA. I've spent a lot of time exploring the factory set of patches on Zebu, and a good number of them are generative patches that were made, I think, mostly by Ben, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ben Jordan, which, if you guys don't know, check out his channel. He does really, really cool synth and sort of like sometimes philosophical stuff and sometimes like scientific type of things. He did like a road trip with Zebu. That was a really cool video. And he made generative patches in like different points in the US, which was really cool. But he made a ton of patches for the factory set. And I sort of really dove into those and tried to explore like what was going on inside them, because there's one in particular that I really, really enjoy. It's called Skating Alone. I think it's Factory 24 or something in the Zebu set. So that has got me really excited. So I'm hoping to make some of my own with Ben and Christopher's guidance and sort of dissecting their patches. And then outside of ZOIA, what's got me excited is the I talked about it on the ZOIA server a bit, but I finally got the V collection, so I've been exploring those soft synths in combination with their effects, which has been really cool because it just allowed me to like play old vintage stuff that I would never, ever, ever be able to afford or have access to. So it's really cool to explore those, even just the presets or diving deep into one or two in particular. So that's been a lot of fun.
I'm going to contradict myself horribly and risk pissing off a lot of people. We're in a bit of a holding pattern because of the chip shortage, right? Like there are some new things happening, and particularly software never stops. And like there's definitely some cool stuff in the new V collection, and like their new line of sample synthesis hybrid stuff seems really cool and has a lot of potential. And they're always like there's but I am excited about some of the dangers of nostalgia, like some of the clones that Behringer is working on, if they pull them off. Like they are saying we're going to have, this OBX with polyphonic aftertouch, which for me is huge. They're working on the CS80 project with a polyphonic aftertouch keyboard, and they may one of the rumors is they may just start using that as like the basic foundation for synths. And like I realize some people are not excited about this like idea of cloning past synths, but like if you look at some of their more innovative products like the Neutron or I forget what the new Neutron is called. They have a new one that's even like crazier. Proton. Yeah. And like the Deep Mind and that sort of thing. Like it just, I think there's a way in which like getting polyphonic aftertouch in a more democratic, like they have also said they're going to make a controller with it, right? So like I know that Behringer is a touchy subject for some people, but like I appreciate the like democratization that's occurring right now. Like sure, I'd love to own a CS80, and if you want to give me a gift of like $50,000 to buy one, I will gladly accept it. And but like that's not going to happen in my lifetime. And the soft synths are great, but there is like that I fetishize hardware. Like I like touching crap. And so like I'm pretty excited about that. I've talked about the Osmos already. That's, I think, again, along those lines of like just sort of making some of the MPE stuff make more sense. Like a lot of the MPE controllers that I've seen in the past, like they're cool, but they're like, what if we use a layout and a design that has nothing to do with any instrument that anyone in the world plays. You know, it's like, what if we wrap an isomorphic keyboard around a Mobius strip? And you're like, it's probably cool, but like, why can't I just have a keyboard that has like an MPE sort of thing, you know?
Right.
And why does it, if I do have that, why does it have to be made out of weird, squishy sponges? To reference at least one of the options that people point to when they ask about that. So yeah, like for me, a lot of it is about just like expressiveness and different like playing options that loom on the horizon. So, you know, like, that's sort of what I'm excited about. Like, I'm not a good keys player, but I like doing it, and I'd like to be able to be more expressive with it.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you know, I don't know if you know the specifics of the Behringer keyboard. Do you know if they're working with the folks?
They're not working with Modeli.
Oh, they're not? Okay. I was curious.
Yeah, they're doing it independently. I'm almost entirely sure of that.
That makes sense.
Like, I mean, the way that Behringer works is they do everything in-house. That's one of their like cost-saving techniques, you know.
Okay.
So like a bunch of the chips that they use, they make. They own Cool Audio and like that sort of thing.
Got it.
So
we'll have potentially 3 manufacturers making poly keybeds.
Right, Fatard put one out.
Yes.
I keep forgetting that.
On the Iridium.
Yeah. My poor desktop Iridium that doesn't have a polyphonic aftertouch keyboard.
Worthless.
Just a piece of junk now. Yeah. So I can talk about, I think I've got audio sorted out. Let's see if I can blast everyone's ears off.
That's good.
And the levels are okay?
Try letting it go a little bit. That's good.
Now I'm going to make it quiet again so that I can talk, because that's what people really want to hear. But so this is Criel Mound, which is on patch storage. You can download it if you want to check it out. I also did like one of my super long live streams. If you want to hear it in action for a couple hours without downloading it, it's there. And I'll probably do a recording and put out an album with it on there somewhere. I'm working on West Virginia themed stuff right now. But I chose this one because, like, so I talked at the beginning of the program about how much I love FM signs, and there are no FM signs in this patch, which makes it a little bit peculiar for me. But like, this is a subtractive synth, so it's, you know, oscillators going into you know, like a filter and a VCA, that sort of thing. And the thing that this patch does that's worth pointing out, and I don't pay attention to this enough. I wish I did. It's you know, is that one of there are 3 oscillators and they all pass through this filter and VCA setup in a classic subtracted synth. But one of them is droning. It just drones at a note. And so, like, what you're hearing, I'm going to bring the sound back between notes. What you're hearing is the play between those oscillators and the droning that occurs. So they create these harmonies based on how they end up in relationship to that droned oscillator. And And then like the other part of that is, we talked about effects. This patch then loops everything and pitches it up an octave. So you get what's happening now with the patch, and then later you get that repeated but up an octave and in reverse, and it tries to play harmony with what the patch is currently producing.
Right.
So you get that, like, it makes a sound that is pretty simple in a lot of ways much more sophisticated, and it makes a harmony much more sophisticated because you have, those two elements that are sort of like at odds with one another in some ways, or come together in some like unexpected ways. So that was like talking about sound design. Like I don't take advantage enough of like drone notes, and this patch has made me think like maybe I should, because it is nice how the other two oscillators sort of create different harmonies with that like
fixed
foundation, right? Like there's that like steadiness, and it's one of the things that I've talked about before in like generative patching is this idea of something that changes but stays the same, and so this is like another way to approach that than some of the like shift register things that I've done before. So that's one of the patches I was going to talk about. And then
Can you just say
other
the name
one,
again so people?
Criel Mound.
Criel Mound.
Yeah, it's I published it in the past few days. I can't recall. And then the other one I was going to talk about is, if I can find it, I need to clear out this thing, is Cheat Lake. And Cheat Lake is like I'm not going to like toot my own horn about being like particularly inventive as a synthesis. Like I just described to you a patch with like subtractive synthesis. I don't think that's super important in terms of like generative patching. In fact, I think like in a lot of ways, simpler voices are better for generative patching, because like one of the things that I think about is like, how does this sound in a variety of different circumstances? And so I try to find like voices that are dynamic without being like too extreme on either end. Like if it's really like abrasive sometimes, it's really abrasive sometimes, and like generative patching is the art of like letting go, but that also like you get to decide what you let go of,
right?
But this is I think a pretty novel approach in that like I haven't seen anyone else do it. I'm sure other people have. What it is a ping filter, and that's not new. But the way that the voice works is that after the filter is a ping filter, I have a video on this. You can look into it more in depth. I'm going to do a quick, you excite a resonant filter, and, you excite a resonant filter, and like the decay of the sound comes from the resonance of that filter rather than from like a traditional envelope, let's say. And so it creates these sort of chimey, plucked sounds. We can probably hear one. So this patch produces those too, but the like different thing that I did, and this goes back to the very beginning and the importance of envelopes, is that after that ping filter voice is created, it passes through a subsequent VCA. And that subsequent VCA is controlled by, it mixes between either being open, right, and then that ping sound comes through, or it has an attack decay envelope added to it. So what you do there is like the one of the distinctive aspects of a pinged filter is the pinged part, right? Like it's got this transient at the beginning, ding, and then it decays. but when the VCA, the secondary VCA, is only controlled by that envelope, it's an attack. So the attack portion cuts off that transient, and like you get these sort of like just sort of harmonic sounds, sort of very pure sine wave sounds. And the thing that makes it interesting, I hope, is that it mixes between those things. So you really get like both, right? You get this mixture of like more distinct transient things and then things that are more like swells. And it's a pretty simple way to get both of those because it's just mixing between these two like sources of control over the secondary VCA. And then it also has a bunch of delays and loopers and other things to build out from that. But the basic sound itself is like very interestingly dynamic, I think, because of that way in which, you know, like you have this control over the energy to just tie it all the way back to the very beginning, right? Like
we love circling around.
Well, we're nearing the end. There should be some sense of closure. What was the first word we uttered? We should make it the last one. Technical?
Probably technical.
But I thought since my job here was to talk about generative voicing, like those are two very different ways of approaching generative voicing. And again, like you can do all sorts. It's your ball game. Do whatever you want. But I think like for me, at least, one of the things about like voice structure with generative patching is trying to find something that's dynamic, but not excessive, right? Like it has depth and changes and that sort of thing, but it doesn't go from like, oh, this is very pleasant to screeching noises. And so resonance is like not something I use a lot in my generative patches because like at different resonances you can get sort of like different responses, and some of them are very like, wow, that sounds like really pleasant and great, and some of them are not like they're more intrusive, right? Hi, Steve. But yeah, do we have more questions? Steve, do you have a question? Let's put Steve on the spot.
Yeah.
Steve, if you don't know, is the ZOIA king. He is the owner of Empress Effects. Let's really put him on the spot. Let's make Steve feel uncomfortable so he never ever comes back to a live stream of ours.
He may have popped in just to say hi.
He may have popped in just to say hi.
Which is fine. I welcome it.
But if he does come back with a question, we'd be glad to honor it.
Or anyone else who has a question.
Or anyone else, yeah.
To finish this out, I think we're reaching that point where we're sort of like grasping for one more topic to talk about before we close it out.
Yeah, I'd say like 10 minutes. You guys have 10 minutes. Either we'll talk about something, which is
just cleaning
in the kitchen. It's good. So how about the Mets? No, I don't follow baseball, unfortunately.
We're used to. It's been many years since I followed baseball.
Yeah. I can tell you that I used to follow the Pirates, and I think they're basically the same team now in that they're a financial investment with no prospects of winning that is only run to come in like second place at best in their division.
In their vision.
Rinse. Yeah, rinse. Why wouldn't you rinse?
Wouldn't you rinse?
What
are you doing? You putting things in the dishwasher?
Is this a Canadian thing? Is there like a Canadian, like we don't we have like this method of cleaning that doesn't involve water because we're, like very environmentally conscious.
Which I applaud.
Yeah, I do too. But I don't know if in America we're just, hey, let's just suck the Colorado River dry, and everywhere else. But the Colorado River is the one that's on my mind a lot because like 70 million people live in its watershed, and it's not in great shape, people.
I did not know that.
Yeah, the Colorado River basically like supplies the water for like Arizona, New Mexico,
Texas,
Utah, Colorado. Okay.
I'll keep that in mind if I ever come over for dinner, Steve. How used is that plate? Plate reverb. I don't know. I'm grasping.
Yeah.
I do want to say, now that Christopher, you've been telling me this for, I think it's years now, to try the Empress reverb. Because like for a while I was like, oh, I have the ZOIA, I have an H9, I don't need another reverb. So was afforded the opportunity to have an Empress reverb, which I'm grateful for, and finally get to try out, some of its algorithms. And while the ones on ZOIA are nice, I don't know, they just, I think you said it best, where they sort of sit really well, and they just have like easy ways to make it work with whatever you're throwing at it.
I was hunting around for mine so that I could hold it up on screen because people don't know what the Empress reverb looks like in this live stream, obviously.
Oh, we got a couple last minute questions too. It's nice reverb. Theoretical voice limit. So the MIDI note in as a cap at 8. It does? Oh, it does.
Yes,
it does.
Yeah, it does. But you can get around. That's not a hard limit because you can do weird stuff. Like you could have 8 of those voices cover a certain number of MIDI notes in, and then a second module would cover so
you
like I guess you could play more than 8 notes in the range that you had ascribed to the first MIDI note in module, but you could have more than 8 notes come in across like different zones or whatever. You could have a lot. I guess you could assign 1 8 output MIDI note in module to each 8 notes of the, you could have full polyphony over everything. So yeah. So you can use just to come back to that, like the simplest answer is you can use either different incoming MIDI channels. That's one way. Or you can sort of split the keyboard using there's a limiter in the MIDI note in module that lets you set the high and low note range that it recognizes. So you can have different ranges for like 2 MIDI note in module. I didn't
realize you can assign splits like that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
In a sense, it's ZOIA. You can do whatever you want.
That's true.
So, yeah, that's the best, I think.
So I have an answer for this one. I just learned about that.
I just learned about that too, because that's a hard question. I mean, I was pretty pleased with that patch where I came up with like adding another VCA after the pinged filter and like adding that sort of new dimension to it. So I'm going to go with that answer. There's always sort of new discoveries and surprises. It's hard to keep track.
It is. There's only so much, like, I don't know, I feel bad because like at times I'll like stop like downloading new patches because I like want to like actually use the set that I have and create my own, and I'm just like, I probably missed out on a ton of the ones you've uploaded and other people have uploaded, in the past few months because I just haven't put anything new on the SD card.
Yeah.
So it's
and I'm constantly like working on stuff, which actually makes like less time. Like I also miss out on some patches because like the ZOIA I'm using today is like the one that I do scratch pad for generative stuff on. So like there are like 4 patches on here that are like not just random tinkerings, and like some of those will go nowhere and some of them will go lots of places, hopefully.
Yeah.
But yeah. Charlie's talking about how great the
Empress reverb is.
Empress reverb is, yeah.
Yeah,
I think like the first. I'll share my Empress story. I think like the first pedal that really put Empress on the, like I'd seen them before, I'm pretty sure, but like the Echo system when that came out was just sort of like, oh, these guys are like,
they mean business.
Yeah, like, and I had an Echo system. I can also speak highly of that. I should get it back. I think the Deluxe Memory Man emulation is like one of my favorite delay algorithms of all time. And there's a bunch of other great ones, but that one stood out to me. Again, I've never played a Deluxe Memory Man, so I don't know what that sounds like. I live in a world of ersatz pleasures.
Rob, you should get a heavy.
Yeah. We should all, especially if Steve is still listening, we should all buy lots and lots of Empress. I mean, I know that sounds like tongue in cheek now, but I've owned quite a few of their things, and I think pretty good stuff. We have this thing where I talk about one of their, we talk about one of their products kind of obsessively. So yeah, like
which one?
The Zubo. Zubu. But yeah, and that's probably like a good place to end it. Is buy Empress products. Yeah, and also be careful what plate you eat off of at Steve's house. Steve, are you still listening? He might have gone away. So I'll plug something that I think I can plug because it'll eventually happen. I think this will eventually happen. Is that I've been sort of harassing Steve and Jay for, it might be a time that can be called years now, about sitting down and doing something to talk about like the development of ZOIA, like the birth of ZOIA. And like, you know, for a while I wanted to like interview them and put together an oral history. And then recently with the boot camp series, you know, I was like, well, Steve's gone on camera again, so now's the time to jump. But we're trying to pin down a day to do sort of like a live stream open Q&A thing. I have some questions that we'll start off with where we, just to sort of get a foundation about like facts about the development of ZOIA, and but then I hope other people have questions too. You know, and the way that I pitched this to them was that if it's in the context of the boot camp series, which was the original plan, but time kind of got away from us. And I don't have a hard date for you yet. It looks like sometime in July. This would be less about how to and more about why for, you know, like what's the you know, how were these decisions made? What was the experience like? That sort of thing. So, you know, when we have that set in stone, I'm sure we will publish a lot of things about that. Yeah, an evening with it probably won't be evening, but an evening with Steve and Jay is on the horizon, and it'll be all softball questions. It'll be just like, you know, what's on the spot, how do you divide a natural logarithm by I, and you have to do that in your head. Simple stuff like that. No, I hope that it is softballs, but I just want them to sort of like tell this story that if you've spent time in the ZOIA community or you've talked, like I've gotten bits and pieces of it from people who were beta testers or employees or whatever, but like the hope I have is to just sort of get Stephen and Jay telling the story as they see it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's I know there's, I'm not sure if it's the whole thing, but there is snippets of it as well in Pedal Crush. There's I think it's like 2 or 3 pages, and it talks a little bit. It's probably not the whole story, but there are, in particular, there are some pictures of like early prototype ZOIAs, which was really cool to see. So I'm sure they would be able to expand on that more.
I'm paywalled. I haven't seen that stuff.
I'll send you PDFs, so I'll scan it for you.
Right. Yeah. I will not distribute those. Unless you ask. No. Yeah. So that I'm pretty excited about that. I hope other people are excited to see that too.
No, that'll be a lot of fun.
And I've never spoken to Jay in person, in this sort of person.
Only over email.
Only over email, where I send him problems and he sounds very tired, is how I would describe our relationship.
But the solutions come eventually.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Jay's, in case you don't know, and I don't mean to take away from Steve, but like this is Jay's baby. Like Jay's super smart dude who seems to know a little bit about everything. So, like yeah.
He'll have perhaps maybe more technical insights, is what you're saying.
I think they'll both be really comfortable if we just ask them like super technical questions. That's the softball Steve wants, is like, what processing unit is in this? But I'm going to ask them things that are more like, what did you feel about that? Which is,
that'll be cool.
Do you have something to plug?
I have music on Bandcamp under Hype Consumer.
Link tree in the description for the.
Yes, yeah. There'll be the link tree. You can find all my links. I haven't made a demo in a while, but I'm hoping to make some more videos soon, and some more tape and microsound music probably coming shortly. Another collection,
nice,
because that's been sort of like, we can have a whole another discussion about modular and stuff, but that's been sort of like my easy way to get like music out, because it's just kind of like, it just happens organically rather than me having to like think about like, chords and lyrics and weird stuff like that.
Oh God, if I had to come up with lyrics, I'd never produce any music ever. Da, 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 my Sharona. Yeah, I'm probably going to do another generative album at some point. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, sorry if there was more. I was going to fade us out. But thanks everyone for hanging out. I hope the period where I was alone and Christopher was in the dark wasn't too bad. I hope I held it up for however long that was. Felt like 15 minutes or whatever, but it was definitely shorter.
My router takes forever to reboot.
Yeah.
Power was out for like 10 seconds, but then it's like,
right. Got to get everything set up.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for the questions, folks. I hope you learned something about ZOIA as a synth, that sort of vague topic, and then the other offshoots that we discussed.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for stopping in.
Clean your plate, Steve.
Clean your plate, and technical.